Hi students, welcome to this video session. I remain Samuel Chukwuemeka, aka Samdom for Peace. In this video session, we shall continue our discussion on the mathematics of elections. So I am going to my website. This will be part two of the video. So click on my picture to enter the site. Click on mathematics. We posted this under exploring math. Click on exploring math. Go to notes, and this is part 2 here. Okay. The plurality method, that is what we shall discuss. Plurality method. Please, it is highly important that you view these videos in order. It is very important you view them in order. Plurality method is one of the voting methods. In fact, it is the most popular voting method. In this video, we shall define the plurality voting method. We shall state the advantages and disadvantages of the plurality voting method. We shall solve problems involving the applications of the plurality voting method. Please, it is important that this is the video playlist, Mathematics of Elections. It is highly recommended that you view these videos in order. Very important. So what is the plurality method? This is the voting method in which the candidate with the most first place votes wins. This is not necessarily the majority candidate. What is the difference? What is the difference between a majority candidate and the candidate with the most first place votes? Let's look at, for example, if you have, say, 100 voters, okay, and these 100 voters are going to vote for two candidates, either of two candidates for a position, it is easy for, when the race is just between two candidates, it is easy to have a candidate win more than 50% of the vote. A candidate that has more than 50% of the vote is what we call a majority candidate. So you have 100 voters. 50% of 100 is a 50. So if you have a candidate that wins 51, okay, not 50, but 51, that candidate is the majority candidate. Okay. Now, when you have more than two voters, two candidates, when you have more than two candidates, sometimes it's not easy to win at least 50% of the vote. It's not, unless you're very popular. So the problem is usually found whereby we have more than two candidates. If we have 3 or more candidates, sometimes it is difficult for one candidate to capture 50% of the vote. Let's say you have 100 votes and you have 3 candidates. So if somebody makes at least 51 and the other person makes maybe 35, okay, and then that means the other person will make 14. Okay, that means the guy that made 51 votes, he's very popular, very, very popular. Okay, so but sometimes it doesn't happen that way. You might have it this way. If the guy makes 51, he's the majority candidate. Now, but when you have it this way, out of 100, you have somebody making maybe 45, you have the other person making 35, and then you have the other person making 20. Okay, that means the candidate that made the 45 votes, he is the candidate with the most first place votes. He is not the majority candidate because he didn't make up to 51 votes. Okay, he didn't make more than 50% of the votes. So he is the candidate with the most first place votes, but he is not the majority candidate. This method is used by several states, counties, cities, local governments, and sometimes for some parties to project their candidate. You know, that candidate must be very popular to make 51% of the vote at least. You know, that candidate must be a majority candidate. We see this particular situation in the Chicago mayoral election. The mayor of Chicago, the incumbent mayor, Rahm Emanuel, he in the last election for the Democratic Party, he didn't make up to 51% of the vote. So he was not a majority candidate. And that is why he will now contest in a runoff election. So, but, you know, unless the person is very, very popular, it is not that easy. You know, when you have the race, I think there are at least 4 candidates for that race. Democratic primary for mayor. I think there are up to at least 4 candidates. So it's difficult unless the person is very popular to capture the majority of the votes, which means at least 51% of the votes. Okay, you know, I gave an example, 100 votes. I mean, it mustn't be 100 votes. It just how many, you know, like if you have 1,000 votes, okay, then 50% of the votes will be 500. Then you must make more than 50% of the vote, which means 501 in order to be a majority candidate. So, but in this plurality method, it only looks at most first place votes. So if the Chicago mayoral election for Democratic primaries was just if they used strictly plurality candidate, Rahm captured, I think, 40-something% of the votes, and the other guy captured 30-something% of the votes. So Rahm would have been declared the winner if they had used plurality method. Okay, but they want the any candidate that will be projected as the nominee to be a majority candidate, which means that candidate must have more than 50% of the vote. Okay, but with the plurality method, it is only looking at the candidate with the most first place votes, not necessarily the majority candidate, because you know, I can ask you this on the test. All majority candidates have the most first place votes, but not all candidates with the most first place votes are majority candidates. Explain. Okay, that is a question I can ask you on the test, and you can you use a real life example to explain it. The real life example is just what I just said about the Chicago mayoral election. I want you to use a real life example. If I ask you on the test to say that you should discuss all majority candidates have the most first place votes, but not all candidates with the most first place votes are majority candidates. Discuss or explain. Use real life applications to support your explanations. Then that is how you can answer it. Another thing is that like we just said, the winner does not have to be the majority candidate, which means more than 50% of the votes. It is the simplest and the most commonly used voting method. A lot of several states use it, cities and counties use it because it's the simplest voting method. Only the first place votes count in determining the winners. Other votes are irrelevant. So in this plurality method, we are just looking at the candidates. If it is a ranked election, then we are looking at the candidates that were ranked first. First place votes. Okay, only those candidates that were ranked first are the ones that matter. Other votes are, other votes that ranked candidates in the second, third, fourth, fifth place, as the case may be, are irrelevant. We are only looking at those votes that have the candidates ranked first in the ballots. Those are the only votes that those first place votes are the only ones that count. In a single choice ballot or winner only outcome, the winner is the candidate with the most first place votes. When you have only a single choice, whereby you have to select only a single choice, then the winner is just that candidate with the most first place votes. But in a preference ballot, that's a ranked ballot, ranking outcome, the first place will go to the candidate with the most first place votes. Second place goes to the candidate with the second most first place votes, and so on. Okay, that's when we have a ranked election. Let's say when we need to when we need to fill in more than one position. When we need to fill in a president, vice president, secretary, assistant secretary, then the president will be the guy with the most first place votes. Then the vice president will be the guy with the second most first place votes, and the rest of them. All right, let's go ahead to do some questions. We are going to, that is why it's important to begin this video from the beginning. Let us review the question 1 that we did in the first video on mathematics of elections, introduction and concepts. That is the first video. The students of the Department of Mathematical Computing and Information Sciences at Jacksonville State University wants to elect a new secretary. Table 1 in the next slide shows the results of the counted ballots in the conventional preference schedule. So we discussed this in the first video. A, using the plurality method, who won the election? B, assuming the MCIS department wants to elect a new president, vice president, secretary, and assistant secretary in that order or rank, which candidates would fill those positions? So this is a ranking ballot. Okay, it has to have a ranking outcome in a preference for a preference ballot. So we have this from our that first video. We have this conventional preference schedule. So we first of all we find the number of students that voted, and that is 122 students. More than 50% of the votes is needed for a majority win. 50% of 122 students is 61. So we need at least 62 first place votes for a majority win. So Stephen, 35 people ranked Stephen first. 39 people ranked Desmond first. 22 people ranked Felicity first. 17 people ranked Agatha first. And 9 people ranked Rita first. None of these candidates had 62 votes. None of them had 62 first place votes. So we don't, in this election, we don't have a majority candidate. We do not, because none of these candidates had at least 62 votes. None of them. But now, do we have a winner for this election? We do, because under the plurality method, we are not looking at the majority per se. We are looking at the candidate with the most first place votes. And from here, we see that Desmond had the most first place votes of 39 votes. Therefore, Desmond is the winner. Okay, that is the way we do it in for plurality candidate, plurality voting method. So Desmond is what we call the plurality candidate. Desmond is the plurality candidate, and he is the winner. I want you to look at the back side. You know, we are going to, as we move ahead in this video, we are going to see some disadvantages of the plurality method. But I want you to look at this. Look at this election for a while. 39 people ranked Desmond first out of 122. It was even less than 50% of the students wanted Desmond as the president, right? They ranked him first. But guess what? 35 plus 22 people, which is 57 people. I know 57 students are not also up to 61. Okay, they are not up to 61, but 57 people did not like him. You see a problem here. 39 students like him as the first, but 57 do not even like him. They ranked him last. So do you think that this is a fair method or not? Do you think that this is a free and fair, let me say fair. Do you think it's a fair voting method? Do you think that Desmond represents the majority of the students of MCIS department? Do you think so? I mean, you can just look it for yourself. I mean, I know that 57 is less than 61. It's also less than 62. Okay, it's not up to 50%. But yet, more people don't like him than those who like him, and yet he won the election. That is one of the problems with plurality voting method. So if you look at this, according to the plurality method, Desmond is the winner. Now, in a ranked system, Desmond will be the president. Then who had the second most first place votes? Stephen will be the vice president. Felicity had 22 first place votes. That's the third most first place votes. Felicity will be the secretary, and then Agatha will be the assistant secretary. Please take note of this order, because as we do part 3, part 4, part 5, you will see different outcomes with those methods, and then you can now think for yourself which method is fair, or which method is fairer than the other. Okay, when we do the border count method, the plurality with elimination method, and then the method of pairwise comparisons, then and then you look at the outcome, because we are going to still use this MCIS department election ballot for those methods, and then you will now see that it is possible that we will have different winners. Then you now think about it, consider it, and then you tell me which method do you think is fairer than the other and why. Okay, so it's like food for thought. Okay, let's go to question 2. The table below shows the preference schedule for an election with 4 candidates, A, B, C, and D. In this election, ties are not allowed to stand. However, if there is a tie, the tie is broken in favor of the candidates with the fewer last place votes. So this is the conventional preference schedule for the election. Use the plurality method to A. Find the winner of the election. B. Find a complete ranking of the candidates. So we have 4 candidates, A, B, C, and D. Of course, plurality method, we are concerned with only first place votes. But we have a tie-breaking rule here. If there is a tie, then we have to now look at the last place votes. And the candidate with the fewer last place votes will now be ranked higher, will now be preferred to the candidate that has more last place votes. This is in case of a tie. So candidate A, let's find the first place votes. It's 157 plus 108 plus 53. Candidate B, first place votes will be 204 plus 114. Candidate C, first place votes will be 164 plus 116. Candidate D, first place votes will be 149 plus 131. This tells you that 204 voters ranked this order, B, A, D, C. 204 voters prefer candidate B as their first choice, then candidate A as their second choice, candidate D as their third choice, and candidate C as their last choice. 116 voters prefer candidate C as their first choice, candidate D as their second choice, candidate A as their third choice, and candidate B as their fourth choice. Okay, so that is what this tells you anyway. So let's find the winner using plurality voting method. If we do that, we see that candidate A has 318 votes, candidate B has 318 votes, candidate C has 280 votes, and candidate D has 280 votes. All right, so we see a tie between A and B, and we see a tie between C and D. That means because we see a tie, we have got to use the tie-breaking rules. Okay? A and B are tied, C and D are tied, because we need to find the winner of the election, and we also need to rank the candidates. First, who is first, who is second, who is third, who is fourth. So the tie-breaking rule, if we go back here, is the tie is broken in favor of the candidates with the fewer last place votes. So what we do now is we now look at the last place votes because of the tie-breaking rule. Candidate A does not have any last place votes. So nobody really dislikes candidate A to place candidate A as the last. Nobody. They don't want candidate A to be last. So candidate A is more popular than candidate B because candidate B, 131 plus 116 plus 53 voters placed him as their last choice. But no voter placed candidate A as the last choice. So candidate A, even though candidate A and B are tied, candidate A is more popular because nobody placed candidate A as their last choice. So candidate A wins the election. Does that make sense? Then, of course, you now have candidate B because they have more votes than candidate C. Candidate B has more votes than candidate C and candidate D. So we have A, B. Now let's come to C and D. C and D, some folks place them as their last choice. So we just have to find fewer last place votes. For C, it's 204 plus 149 plus 108. For D, it is 164 plus 157 plus 114. So when we do that, we see that 461 voters placed candidate C last as their last choice, while 435 voters placed candidate D as their last choice. So first of all, we have A, then we have B, because B has more votes than C and D. Now, between C and D, the fewer last place votes was D. So D and then C. Comprendez? Comprenez-vous? Do you understand? Okay. Question 3. The table below shows the preference schedule for an election with 4 candidates, A, B, C, and D. In this election, ties are not allowed to stand. However, if there is a tie, the tie is broken in favor of the winner of a head-to-head comparison between the candidates. Please, this is very important. Head-to-head comparison. That would take us to another concept we call a Condorcet. Condorcet candidate. What is a Condorcet candidate? A Condorcet candidate is a candidate that wins every head-to-head comparison. It's either head-to-head comparison or pairwise comparison against every other candidate. So when you do a head-to-head comparison between that candidate and every other candidate, that candidate wins. That candidate is known as a Condorcet candidate. Don't worry, we shall explain it further when we do part 5, method of pairwise comparison. Okay, make sure you view that video. We shall explain it further about Condorcet candidate. This case, head-to-head is this. What do I mean by head-to-head comparison? Head-to-head comparison is also known as pairwise comparison. That means you have to match each candidate against every other candidate. So, like A, B, C, D. Okay, if we are to do head-to-head comparison, we do A versus B, A versus C, A versus D. Then B versus C, B versus D. Then C versus D. Okay, but listen, that is not what we are supposed to do now, because we will treat this topic extensively when we do the part 5 video, method of pairwise comparison or head-to-head comparison. But this came up because of the question, if there is a tie, then you have to do head-to-head comparison. They don't want you, in this question, they do not want you to break the tie using the candidate that has fewer last place votes. They didn't want you to do that. Like this, candidates with the fewer last place votes. That is how you break the tie, if there is a tie. But they want you to break the tie using a head-to-head comparison. Okay? First of all, let's find the most first place votes first and see whether we have a tie. So, if you do the first place votes, candidate A has 324 votes. Of course, if you just add it up here, 197 plus 120 plus 7. Okay? For B, it will be 205 plus 107 plus 48. For C, it will be 268 plus 92. For D, it will be 113 plus 147. Right? So when you do that, you have this. We see that B and C are tied. And they are tied for the most first place votes. B and C. Then after that, once we can get B and C, then the next person will be A, and the last person will be D. So we need to fix this problem. B and C are tied. So we have to do head-to-head comparison or pairwise comparison. So this is what I mean by that. You will come each of this column, you want to rank B and C. Who comes, you want to find out candidate B and candidate C. Who was ranked higher than the other? Okay, if you look at this column, 268 people prefer candidate C to candidate B. So take that 268 and give to candidate C. Take that 268 votes, give it to candidate C. You come to this ballot, this column, 205 voters prefer candidate B to candidate C. So take 205 votes, give to candidate B. You come to this column, 197 voters prefer candidate C to candidate B. So you take the 197 votes and give to candidate C. You come to this fourth column, 120 people prefer candidate B to candidate C. They like candidate B more than candidate C. So give 120 votes to candidate B. So when you keep doing that, okay, when you add up all the votes, you will see that candidate C has 677 votes, and then candidate B has 627 votes. Yay! Candidate C is the winner. Yay! Mr. C is the winner. Yay! Mr. C is the winner. Okay, so C will come first, then B second, then because of these votes, A has more votes, A third, and then D fourth. Does that make sense? CBAD is the ranking. Do you understand it? Question 4. Question 4 is consider an election with 470 voters and 7 candidates. What is the smallest number of votes that a plurality candidate could have? In this one, you just, plurality candidate must not be the majority candidate. Okay? But the majority candidate must be the plurality candidate. That is another way I can word it. Another way I can word the question is this. A plurality candidate must not necessarily be a majority candidate. But a majority candidate must be a plurality candidate. Discuss. So, plurality candidate, you just do 470 divided by 7. And that is at least 68 votes to get to be a plurality candidate. But now, if I ask you, what of to be a majority candidate? What if I ask you this? What's the smallest number of votes that a majority candidate could have? You just do 50% of it, 0.5 times 470, which is 235. So at least 236 votes. A plurality candidate will have at least 68 votes. A majority candidate will have at least 235 votes. Does that make sense? Because it's 50%. 470 voters is 470 votes. More than 50% of the votes. So 50% of 470 is 235. So more than 50%, the majority candidate must have at least 236 votes. So I'm going to write it, I'm going to write it later on after this video. I will write it here. Yeah, I think I've written it before for majority win. I've written it here, majority win, majority candidate. So I'm going to I'm gonna write it again here. Plurality candidate and majority candidate. Okay. Question 5. In an election involving 5 candidates, what is the maximum number of columns possible in the preference schedule? Here we have a formula. The maximum number of columns will be 5 factorial. Factorial notation. If you look at the scientific calculator, in your scientific calculator, let me pull mine up. This is a Windows 8. You know, Windows 8, if you want to find it, you go here, click on search, type in calculator. Calculator. There you go. And, you know, when you type in calculator, it first of all comes up you have it like this, actually, standard. You know, when if that's your first time, just click on view and change it to scientific. So 5 factorial, factorial notation, n factorial, you see n factorial. Just do 5 and press this. 5 factorial, 120. Which means 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. So you have a general formula here. You can take it down. If the election involves n number of candidates, then the maximum number of columns possible will be n factorial. Just take note of that, okay? Now let us discuss the advantages of the plurality voting method. It is the simplest voting method. It's used by several states, including the state of Maine. The state of Maine uses plurality voting method, and some other states, counties, and cities. It satisfies what we call the majority criterion. We shall discuss this criterion extensively when we do the 6th part of the video playlist. That is the fairness criteria. But what is majority criterion? It means that if you have a majority, if you have a majority in the election, then the plurality voting method should declare that majority candidate as the winner. If you have a majority candidate, then the plurality candidate will be that majority candidate. That is what it means that it satisfies the majority criterion. Okay. The next one is satisfies the monotonicity criterion. We shall discuss this criterion later on as we move ahead. We shall discuss it. Another advantage, you might call it an advantage or you might not, but I think it's an advantage. You know, in the United States, have you ever thought about, okay, why do we have a kind of 2-party system? You know, Democrat and Republican. When we will look at these later on, but the plurality voting method, it tends to reinforce that 2-party system. In other words, it doesn't give voice to other third parties or other minority parties. Because why is this so? If you look at it, the majority of voters will either vote Democrat or Republican. They regard third parties or independents as minor candidates. Because the person with the most first place votes, the highest number of votes, win, even though that person might not be the majority candidate, you will see that because this 2-party system, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are the 2 most popular, they tend to dominate. Candidates from those parties are the only ones that are for the most part, they are the only ones that are that the race is actually between, those two. I mean, for the most part. I mean, I'm not saying that there are not exceptions, but for the most part, the race is usually between the Democratic candidate and the Republican candidate. So you might call it a strong democracy, or you might say, hey, it is a disadvantage because the voices of the other poor masses, the other minority or minorities are not heard. Okay, but it tends to produce a stable democracy. Okay, so you won't have to have 100 candidates vying for an election. So those are the advantages. Now let us look at the disadvantages. The plurality method violates the Condorcet criterion. We shall demonstrate this in the part 6 of the video playlist. It will be good if you see how it is, then you will kind of know what I'm talking about. This method violates it, and we shall prove it. We shall prove that it violates that criterion. We talked about the Condorcet candidate, the candidate that will always win every other candidate in a head-to-head comparison or in a pairwise comparison. Using the plurality method, that is one disadvantage. It is possible to have a winner that does not have the majority, of course. Like we said earlier, the plurality candidate is not necessarily the majority candidate. Another disadvantage is that it tends to deny fair representation to third parties, racial minorities, and women by creating insincere votes for the major parties. Let me explain this. Insincere votes. What do I mean by this? If you look at some elections, for instance, you might look at the election between Bush, Clinton, and Perot. Okay, when you look at those elections between Bush, Clinton, and Perot, some voters, actually, they probably don't like Clinton. They don't like Bush, but if they look at it and they say, hey, you know what? Perot is not even going to stand a chance to win the presidency. All right. So when they think that way, they will just say, okay, between Bush and Clinton, who is the lesser evil? Well, hey, this is not me, okay? Now, but they will now say, okay, between Bush and Clinton, who is the lesser evil? Let me just go and vote for the lesser evil, because I know that Perot won't stand a chance. Those votes are called insincere votes. You're not sincere, because you did initially you don't like to vote for Clinton, you don't want to vote for Bush, but you now say, okay, hey, this other guy is, he doesn't stand a chance. I don't want to waste my votes. I don't want to waste it. So you just go and say, okay, let me go and vote for Bush, or let me go and vote for Clinton. You might say, hey, this guy raised taxes. Hey, let me go and vote for this guy. Of two evils, vote for the lesser one. Those votes are what we call insincere votes. Votes that are gone to the major parties. Votes that are gone to major parties because the other guy doesn't stand a chance, because the third parties or the minor or the other candidate doesn't stand a chance. So rather than for the voters to waste their votes, waste in quotation marks, they now go and vote for one of the candidates in the major parties. That is insincere votes for the major parties. I mean, come on now, it's a normal occurrence. I mean, look at it, it's a normal occurrence. It's one of the disadvantages, major disadvantage of a plurality voting method. Another one is that it discourages voter turnout. for those voters that do not want to vote for the candidates from the major parties. So some voters also will come rather than say, okay, let me go and vote. Let me go and give insincere votes to one of the to a lesser evil candidate. Let me not just vote at all, because those candidates, I don't want them, therefore let me not go and vote at all. And I'm sure some people in Nigeria will do that. Some people in Nigeria, they look at the two candidates coming out now. Oh, what about me? Am I coming out too? I said in the first video that I now decided to run. If you view the first video, you will see I said I decided to run. Anyway, so what some Nigerians will do on March 28th, this is what they will do. They will say, okay, good luck, Jonathan. Things are not working. Okay, people are still very, very poor. The Nigerians graduate, there are no jobs. So they will say, well, I don't want this guy. I'm not, I don't want him. And then they look at the Buhari. This guy before has overthrown a democratically elected government. He's too strict. He's too this. He's too that. He's too that. That is what some voters will say. I mean, I'm not saying. Okay, I'm just saying that these are the possible statements from voters. And they will say, you know what? I don't like Buhari. I don't like Jonathan. Let me just go and sit down and not vote. That is a problem, one of the disadvantages of a plurality voting system. Okay? When the voters don't like the two candidates from the major parties, they say, you know what? And why, some people say, Nigeria, a lot of people are living in less than $1 a day. We have all these rich mineral resources, but the government is too corrupt under Jonathan. I mean, people are still suffering and dying and starving, we are not seeing the dividends of democracy. We are not seeing jobs. We're not seeing the oil money that we have. We have so many plentiful resources, and people are still suffering. People still can't eat 3 times a day. There are no jobs. People graduate and they don't have jobs. There are a lot of corruption. And then some people will say, why are we reshuffling old leaders? Don't we have capable young people that would lead and bring us the true dividends of democracy? Why? Why do we want to run away from Nigeria? Why? So they will just say, you know what, these two folks, I'm not just going to vote. And then they will sit down at home. So it discourages voter turnout. For those voters that do not want to vote for the candidates from the major parties. Then it tends to create a high level of wasted votes for the third party or minor party candidates. That is also a disadvantage of them, And another thing I want to say in this about the disadvantage of this is, some candidates, if they look at the chance, okay, that if they cannot be elected on the platform of this party, and maybe they don't support the ideas of the other party, but they just say, okay, let me just go because I want to stand a chance of getting elected on a major party, they will just change their position. See, what I'm saying here is this. Barack Obama, President Obama, he wouldn't have a chance to be a Republican candidate. He wouldn't have the chance to be. But then this guy, he doesn't support all the ideals of the Democratic Party. Like, he wasn't for gay and lesbian. He wasn't for it. So, but he said, okay, you know what? Because he wants to actually contest, he wants to contest for the presidency, and he needs to come out from either of these two major parties. Well, let him just go and get into Democratic Party, and then it doesn't matter, provided that he gets elected on that platform first. I think I've explained it. I hope I've explained this very well. Okay. Now, the plurality method, it violates the public enemy criterion. We shall still come to this as we discuss this further. What do we mean by public enemy criterion? Some people, like in the case of Desmond, okay, Desmond, I know that 57 students didn't like Desmond. But now, it's still possible, it's still possible that majority of the last place votes, which should still be 62. It's still possible to see elections whereby 62 people wouldn't like Desmond, and yet he will still be the winner. It's still possible under the plurality method, because he has the most first place votes. Because we don't look at the other votes, we only look at the first place votes. It is still possible that 62 students, which will constitute a majority, will place Desmond last, and yet Desmond will still win an election. It is possible under the plurality method. So that is known as the public enemy criterion. The public enemy is the candidate that has the majority of the last place votes. That's the public enemy candidate. Okay? Then it also violates the independence of irrelevant alternatives criterion. We shall discuss this further in the video on the fairness criteria. But what does this mean? It means this. If we have an election, and let's say candidate A is the winner, then we just noticed, okay, candidate B was not supposed to contest for this election anyway. Our candidate C was not supposed to contest for this election. So if we disqualify them, candidate A should still be able to win the election. If you are a popular candidate, if you are a majority candidate, if people like you, that they want to elect you as the leader, you should win an election regardless of which other candidate gets disqualified or not. So we shall look at this later on. Let's see a good example of the state of Maine. This is the 2010 state of Maine, U.S. state of Maine governorship election. Paul LePage contested on the Republican Party. Elliot Cutler is an independent. Sean Moody, independent. Kevin Scott, independent. And then Libby Mitchell was the nominee from the Democratic Party. Democratic Party nominee. So look at the votes that were counted. Paul LePage won 38.2% of the votes. Elliot Cutler 36.5%. Before this election, the polls had it that it would be a tight race between the Republican and the Independent. Okay. I don't know whether you've noticed election, and this happened in Kansas in this past election, whereby when the race is between a Republican and is hotly contested race between a Republican and an Independent. Independents tend to go Democratic. So you might see, okay, hey, you know what? A Democratic candidate might say, okay, you know what? I want to drop out. The Democratic nominee might say, okay, I want to drop out. So guess what? Because if the Democratic guy drops out, guess what? Assuming Libby Mitchell dropped out, was disqualified, then if Libby Mitchell was disqualified, who do you think would win this election? If I ask you, who do you think? Because you know that most Democrats will now tend to vote Elliot Cutler, and that would change the dynamics. Okay, we don't want that. If you are going to win, you have to win regardless of who is disqualified or who is eliminated or whoever drops out. Now, when we talk about the independence of irrelevant alternatives, if one of the candidates is disqualified, it should not affect the chances of the winning candidate. That is what we mean. We shall discuss that more when we do fairness criteria. So, but look at this now with plurality candidate on the U.S. state of Maine governorship election. Paul LePage is the governor, 38.2% of the vote. Okay, folks, look at it now. 38% of the vote. Yet 62%, more than 51%. Let's say it's 38.2%. Okay, so if it was 38% approximately, that means 62% of the residents of Maine, of the citizens of Maine, don't want LePage as the governor. Yet he won. That is one of the disadvantages of the plurality method. He is not a majority candidate, but he is the plurality candidate. Less than the majority of 51%. The majority is 51%. So he was elected. More than 50% of Maine voters don't want him. Yet he was elected governor. That is plurality method. We are looking for majority of first place votes, not necessarily the majority candidate. That is the problem. Okay, yet this is widely used. It is widely used. So this is the next slide is part of the article from Portland Press Herald. Okay, that is part of what they wrote. That the election of Paul LePage with 38% of the vote means that Maine's next governor won't take office with the support of the majority of voters. This is in the Portland Press Herald. Okay, so I want you to consider for yourself, because you are the leaders of tomorrow. You have the ability to make decisions. You are not just here to learn this, but you are here to learn and apply it and know what is good for the society. Okay? These are the referenced websites and the references. Thank you so much for listening, students. Watch out for other videos. And you have a great evening.